there's been a lot of talk this season about saving Aston Villa's season, or getting players in the January window who will turn their season around, who will pull them up from the bottom of the ocean and all that sort of thing. I just don't agree with that narrative around Aston Villa. I think the season so far has been largely positive. They've played some decent football. Sure, they're in danger of going down, but 3 teams have to get relegated. They've just come up from the Championship. I think they can take a lot of credit for what they've done all season, particularly from what they've seen in the Cup. I think they're actually in an okay place, and I think they will survive. Like, 2 points above the relegation zone at the moment. As you say, they'll have this reservoir of confidence now that's been topped up after midweek. And I just think if you look at the teams below them, Bournemouth kind of nosediving at the moment, and have been for different parts of the season, obviously very unlucky with injuries. Watford are obviously the big wild card who are going the other way, and Norwich are doomed. West Ham then, complete basket case of a club. So you'd be looking at almost West Ham, Bournemouth and Norwich to go down ahead of Aston Villa at the moment.
What do you think, Gary? You're not saying they're too big to go down, Villa, but they're too good to go down.
Oh, no, I don't believe that ever, that you're too good to go down. I went down with a West Ham team on 42 points as such, and they had a host of top-class players. We know that Roy Keane got relegated to Stuart Pearce for Forest. I don't think that. I think if you go down, you've gone down for a reason. You haven't been good enough. And I think I agree with Owen there in terms of what's happening with Watford. The impact that Pearson's made has been huge, but there's real pressure on West Ham now. They play Brighton at home on Saturday at a time where the supporters are not really behind the team, or they're certainly not behind the owners. That's a massive, massive game for them, because of their next 8 games, they play City, Liverpool, Arsenal, Spurs away, Wolves and Chelsea at home. If they don't win against Brighton on Saturday, I think they're in real trouble.
Yeah, how do you see it panning out? Like Norwich, it looks obviously kind of cut adrift a little bit there at the bottom, and will probably be the most likely one to go down. But after that, I mean, there's, Jesus, take your pick really from any of those things. You might even include Newcastle and Burnley in that mix. Yeah,
I think ultimately, Adrian, it's about momentum. Who's in form going into the remaining period? We talked about Watford, and the upturn under Pearce has been unbelievable, to be perfectly honest. But you're right, I don't see, there's no doubt in my mind, Norwich won't get out of it. I made that decision quite early in terms of their philosophy, in terms of playing out from the back. They're not set up defensively to survive in the Premier League. And the frustration is that they actually can score goals. And if they just locked it up a little bit, they probably would have survived. But you're right, I think it can go anyway. I think the transfer window closing today will have a big bearing. Who's able to get players in, who's fit now for the remainder, because there's so many points to play for. And if you just won a couple of games back-to-back, it can make a massive difference.
You mentioned there, Gary, getting relegated with West Ham back in the day. Like, obviously, they've bounced back time and time again. They obviously got relegated post that again, bounced back to the Premier League again. What's your sense on where they're at now? If they get relegated, is there a possibility that there could be a sort of Sunderland-esque vibe to the club?
Well, I wouldn't expect them to drop down to League One. That was a horror show for Sunderland, it really was. And obviously we've seen Wolves do something similar as well. They're back now, giving a brilliant account of themselves in the Premier League. But I do worry for West Ham. There's a lot of talk at the moment, certainly with supporters saying that they believe that if they were to get relegated, it would be a good thing because they can regroup. I just don't buy into that one bit, because I don't think there's a divine right for any team that gets relegated that they're going to get promoted. The Championship is a real struggle to get out of. I think West Ham are in big trouble. I really do. I think you're looking at the way they're set up. There's protest now from the supporters to the owners, and the owners who like to build themselves as West Ham fans, but I don't think any of the true supporters who are paying to go and watch believe that for one moment. They believe that this club's being run as a business. There's still a lot of emotion attached to the fact that they've left Upton Park and gone to this big new stadium. The problem is this stadium is not giving them any advantage on the pitch. They've lost 6 of their last home games at the London Stadium, so it's a difficult one. It really is. But you're looking at David Moyes. I think what he will do, he'll get them defensively organised far more than Pellegrini did. But the problem is that won't be enough. You need to score goals, and we've even seen in the game against Liverpool is that maybe they did restrict them, but Liverpool were playing at a canter. And the frustration now for West Ham is that they're even turning on their so-called flair players. The likes of Lanzini was booed off the pitch. So it's a difficult job for David Moyes, no doubt. And I think it's coupled with the fact that he hasn't even been able to get in a full coaching staff yet. He's still looking to find the coaches he needs, let alone the players.
Yeah, we might move on to probably the fixture of the weekend. It's Pep against Jose. It's Spurs against Manchester City this weekend, Gary. Looking at this, it's quite an interesting historical element to this, because you go back to the Champions League 10 years ago, where you had Pep against Jose and that unbelievable tie between Inter Milan and Barcelona, which in my opinion is the best display of bus parking we've seen, certainly from Jose Mourinho. It's interesting looking at even his ability to park the bus in the intervening 10 years, and I do wonder, is that kind of a lessening of Jose Mourinho's aura, or is it the strength of other managers being able to figure that out pretty easily?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think at that period, Jose Mourinho was at his best. I had seen that Inter Milan team live in the quarterfinals against Chelsea, and it's a masterclass of a defensive performance. Inter Milan won 1-0 at the bridge to go through on aggregate. He had someone like Samuel Eto'o, who was probably one of the best centre-forwards in Europe at the time, literally playing like an unorthodox left-back. Such was the shift his team were putting in, and they totally negated Ancelotti's Chelsea. But I think those type of defensive masterclass have been few and far between, certainly since he's gone to Tottenham. It's been a real problem. And I would certainly think that I would have believed that his impact would have been greater than it has been so far at Spurs. I think you have to take into account the injuries that they've had, and obviously the high-profile one is Harry Kane. But I think also Sissoko's injury has hit Mourinho very hard in terms of that physicality that he likes to have in his teams. But this will be a fascinating game. I'm covering it on commentary. I'm really looking forward to it, because no matter where Jose is at the moment, there's always edge when he goes up against Guardiola.
They're both at, it strikes me, kind of interesting enough junctures in their careers as well, Gary. Like the Jose Mourinho may have to settle, and he's only 57, for the next sort of 12 to 15 years. I'm sure he'll probably get a couple of top gigs during that time, but it feels like he's maybe gone over the precipice of his sell-by date almost. Whereas, like with Pep, is staying at City, does he need to get out of there almost to freshen things up a small bit for himself as much as anything else?
Well, listen, he has formed for this in terms of choosing to go on a sabbatical when he left Barcelona prior to going to Bayern Munich. But I'm just not. I just don't buy into that he's finished, or I don't buy into that he's struggling. I just think that the tables have been turned. That he has got a brilliant team at Manchester City still, but I think the defensive injuries have impacted. But why I say the tables have turned is that his brilliant team is up against an exceptional one right now in Liverpool, in a way that Liverpool had to accept finishing second last season. So I don't believe for one moment that he's struggling. I know that he is the type of manager, and he's quite vocal. I think in a recent game against Crystal Palace, he said, listen, I won't be in a dugout at 70-odd years of age like Roy Hodgson. I'll be away doing something else. So I don't think he's going to be there into his 60s or 70s, but I still think he's got a big role still to play at Manchester City.
Yeah, you know, they say that until they get into the late 60s, and then they're like, yeah, I'll just cream this out for an extra couple of years.
Well, exactly, because when you're in it, you always think, well, listen, maybe the grass is greener, but as soon as you're out of it, that's when they start pining for the job again. Yeah,
nice little retirement pot, Gary. Sort of 4 or 5 million for a couple of years work, and away we go. What's going to happen then at that game? You're on commentary at Spurs City at the weekend. Is that so it's such an important game, obviously, in the context of Champions League places?
Oh, it's massive. It is, and I think the mindset for Mourinho will be, he won't be a fool. He won't think that because City are so far in the title chase that it's going to be a particularly easy game. I think the very fact that Laporte's back from injury is massive, and I'd argue this with anyone. You take Van Dijk out of that Liverpool team, and they would not be showing the type of form that they have now. And that's not to say that you're a one-man team. I don't believe that for one moment. But it's just such a vital part of that team. And he's been a huge miss, because if you think about Manchester City offensively, the improvements in Sterling, how well De Bruyne is playing, Mahrez now, and all the other guys that we haven't probably got time to mention, offensively, they're still at their brilliant best. But it's just that problem is that in terms of not having centre-halves you can rely on. And unfortunately, when Laporte's not there, coupled with company moving on, they haven't had that this season. To the extent that John Stones doesn't even make a back three, Guardiola decides to go with 2 fullbacks either side of Fernandinho against United. So that just shows you the problems they're having.
What about United Wolves? Fascinating game Saturday evening, 5:30 start there. The sort of like schizophrenic at some degrees United season continues. Like, it's every time you start to think that actually I think Solskjaer's got this and the team are behind him, and obviously they've made the signing now during the week as well, that this could all be great, and then suddenly it's like from one game to another you really don't know where this team are at. Well,
no, listen, in terms of the schizophrenic nature of it, I think they actually are consistent in that when they play up against teams who are expansive, they can play that way because they're set up to counter-attack. When they play up against teams who sit in and say to United, okay, break us down, they can't do it. And they've consistently done that. People are saying, why are they able to beat the better teams? That is the reason. And the problem that I have with Manchester United is that they're so one-dimensional. They're a one-trick pony, essentially, in that they can only play counter-attacking football. Now, I know the investment in Fernandes in terms of his stats, this is a player who has scored, I think, 36 goals, 24 assists since the start of last season. This is a player who has that ability. Whether or not he can replicate that in the Premier League remains to be seen, because the Premier League is a far tougher challenge for him. But it's interesting now, Ethan, I've just seen some news breaking there that United have made a bid for their old boy, Josh King, from Bournemouth. That just shows you they're trying to get people in as such. But I agree with you, Adrian. I think every time that Solskjaer's under real pressure, he seems to get a result, and that time seems to buy him more time. But I still don't buy into it. I still don't believe this is the way forward for Manchester United, as much as people are saying that, you know, it's a big job. Some of the most experienced managers in the world would struggle with it. You've got a manager who is out of his depth, in my opinion. Yeah,
like you talk about the counter-attacking element of Manchester United, which is where they're at their best. A signing like Bruno Fernandes probably doesn't change that in the short term. That doesn't arrest the sort of decline that you can see against some opposition when they need to control the game and they need to have possession, because it seems that Bruno Fernandes might play in the number 10 role, at least until Marcus Rashford is back. So I'm not sure does that actually change how much possession Manchester United will have to actually take the initiative in those sort of games.
Yeah, well, listen, exactly. I made that point a couple of weeks ago, talking about if you were to get the best playmaker in the world and play for Manchester United, they don't want to play through the thirds.
Yeah.
So what's the point of having it? They want to go through the team as quickly, get from back to front as they can. And, you know, I'm not dismissive of a counter-attacking team, not at all, because I think a lot of people talk about the great Ferguson team, but at times with Ronaldo, Rooney, Tevez, that's exactly what they were. Do you remember that unbelievable performance at the Emirates when they battered Arsenal in the Champions League in a magnificent counter-attacking display? But my issue is that this is Manchester United, and to only have one way of playing is just not good enough. And everyone can talk about philosophies, and you can say about Liverpool, they have a style of play, but they can beat you anyway, Liverpool. Manchester City can invariably beat you anyway. And people may counter that and say, well, listen, Pep Guardiola's philosophy is total football. Yeah, it is. But it can beat the best of teams. Listen, we know Liverpool, probably the exception, they can't beat them. But Manchester United can only beat a certain team, the top 6 teams, because they're expansive, they want the ball, and United are happy to let them. As soon as United have the ball, just can't break teams down. I just find it difficult, and I have to keep reminding myself that not to judge Manchester United on the Manchester United that I played against, but it's difficult because that's the standard that they set.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see. The fancy Wolves might be able to get something out of that game as well at the weekend. Gary, thanks a million. Pleasure as always.
Thanks, guys. Good luck.
Gary Breen on the line there, looking ahead to the weekend's action.